Good morning. The Senate is now in session.
Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor, the President.
I'm in receipt of excuse for Senator McLean. She is traveling on government business and therefore will not be with us for the duration of this sitting. This morning we have in the chamber with us the presence of Mr. and Mrs. Nicholas McLean of Great Britain, and Mr. McLean is a former assistant to the late Baroness Thatcher, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Madam President, I am commanded to lay the Barbados National Energy Policy 2017 to 2037, as well as the Combermere School financial statements for the year ended March 3rd, 2008.
Reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate, and moved by a minister.
Madam President, I beg to move that Standing Orders 22.1 and 45.2 be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Question is that these standing orders be now suspended. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Accordingly, these standing orders are suspended for the duration of this sitting.
Introduction of bills.
Madam President, I beg to give notice of the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018, also the Value-Added Tax Amendment Bill 2018, and the Cess on Milk Bill 2018. I also want to give notice of a resolution that Parliament approve under Sections 3 and 5 of the External Loan Act, Cap 94D, respectively. A, the borrowing of the sum of $13.925 million in the currency of the United States of America on the international capital markets by the issue of securities arranged by Answer Merchant Bank Limited with Consolidated Finance Company Limited as co-arranger for the purpose of refinancing the existing debt obligations of the Government of Barbados. And B, the establishment of a sinking fund for the redemption of each issue of securities made under the said Act and for monies necessary to maintain and service that fund. Madam President, I also beg to move the first reading of the bills I mentioned, the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018, the Value-Added Tax Amendment Bill 2018, and the Cess on Milk Bill 2018.
Question is that these bills be now read for the first time. Honourable Senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Accordingly, these bills have now been read for the first time.
Public business. Order number 4, in the name of Senator the Honourable D.W. Boyce, Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, to move the passing of a resolution that Parliament approve under sections 3 and 5 of the External Loan Act, Cap 94D, respectively. A, the borrowing of the sum of $13.925 million in the currency of the United States of America on the international capital markets by the issue of securities arranged by ANSA Merchant Bank Limited with Consolidated Finance Company Limited as co-arranger for the purpose of refinancing the existing debt obligations of the government of Barbados, and B, the establishment of a sinking fund for the redemption of each issue of securities made under the said act and for monies necessary to maintain and service that fund.
Senator Boyce, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, this resolution relates to refinancing of a loan made a few years ago to the government of Barbados for the purpose of providing resources to the Barbados Cane Industry Corporation in the efforts to begin the restructuring of the sugarcane industry in Barbados. That loan matured earlier this year and has been repaid, but in order to make sure that the cash flow is not affected by this repayment, the government of Barbados is doing a refinancing. They're borrowing again to replace those funds that would have been used for repayment of this loan. The total loan that was borrowed was in the order of 73 million Barbados dollars, of which about 27 million Barbados dollars, 28 million Barbados dollars, or equivalent of 13.725 million US dollars, 13.925 million US dollars, was in a US dollar bond arranged by ANSA McCall and Consolidated Finance. It is that US dollar portion of the bonds that we are here to discuss a resolution on. That US 13.925 million is proposed that be borrowed under the special loans under the External Loans Act. It was previously borrowed under the Special Loans Act, but advice coming from the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel and the Solicitor General's Office has indicated that we should do it under the External Loans Act, where we put the external borrowings, rather than the Special Loans Act, which we use largely for domestic special borrowings. And so we've come to the Chamber to discuss this resolution so that we can properly proceed with the issue of the bonds for the 13.925 million US dollars. The tenor or the maturity of the bond will be 6 years. The bond is being raised at a coupon interest rate of 7.95% per annum. The interest is payable semi-annually, and the principal is also being repaid in 12 equal semi-annual installments starting 6 months after the disbursement. The bond is being issued at a price of 98.93%, which is just a little bit below par, which makes the effective interest rate a little above 7.95%, probably in the order of 8.2%, 8.15, 8.2% for the borrowing. Madam President, that is in line with the sorts of borrowing spreads that Barbados now has to pay. Indeed, it probably is a little bit better than the spreads that we've now had to pay over U.S. currency for borrowings in the international market. Indeed, we know for certain that the rate we're now getting on this borrowing is a little bit less than what it was earlier on, and therefore we're happy to be able to accept this particular loan. Now, the fact that we've had this loan refinanced without any particular difficulty, I think speaks to the confidence that still is reposed by consolidated finance with Ansel McCall in the Barbados economy. And you know, Ansel McCall and consolidated finance have kept very close ties with the Barbados economy. They've kept on top of the situation, and so they know the economy very, very well. And this is a manifestation of their knowledge of the economy, that they do not share the view that all is dark or all is lost when it comes to the economy. Madam President, we also have to bear in mind the purpose for which this loan was made. Apart from originally, that really was to support the sugarcane industry. You know, Madam President, that the government of Barbados supports the sugarcane industry by servicing the debts of the Barbados Agricultural Management Company that runs the factories and runs some of the estates that government has leased. As you know, government leased several of those estates going back now close to 25 years in an attempt back then to rescue the sugarcane industry. At that time, it was still largely seen as a sugar industry, designed to produce largely bulk sugar for export to the UK with a small amount of special sugars. Since then, the thinking has progressed a lot further, and it is now seen as a sugarcane industry, still producing some bulk sugar, but producing much more special sugars, which have the premium prices in the overseas markets, focusing a lot more on the quantum and the quality of the molasses it produces, since that molasses goes into one of a very important manufacturing industry, our rum industry, which earns a considerable amount of foreign exchange for the country, and which was, frankly, worried about the declining production of molasses at one stage, considering that their demand for molasses was increasing in line with the demand for rum, especially the overseas demand for rum. And we were importing molasses from several countries to go along with our own production of molasses. That posed a couple of risks for us. One was, of course, the fact that we needed to maintain a certain percentage of our input as Barbadian input so that we could retain the rule of origin, that it was Barbados molasses, and so benefit from the duty-free entry into some of our export markets. If you didn't have that certificate of origin and said you were a Barbadian product, you would not have been able to enjoy the benefits that Barbados had under the special trading arrangements with the UK and with Canada and so on. So there was some concern that our reducing industry was going to affect that key manufacturing industry. Madam President, there's also some developments in the rum industry outside of Barbados, where a number of large US-owned producers have begun to increase their production very considerably based on some special tax arrangements that the US government had put in place to favor its the producers in the US and its territories of rum. And those producers began to buy up the molasses available, particularly out of the Dominican Republic, at very considerable volumes, which meant that the supply of imported molasses was also itself becoming a little tricky. And so the view in Barbados has been that we need to make sure that we can revive the sugarcane industry in order that we can get the molasses that we need for that rum industry, which earns such foreign exchange. Despite the challenges that it has had with the U.S. and with the U.S. taxation arrangements. We also, Madam President, determined that we should reduce the risk in the sugarcane industry by having it supply a product for which the demand was constant, relatively constant, and for which they could get a price that was reasonably stable. That product, Madam President, is electricity. Using not only the bagasse that comes from the production of the sugar, from the grinding of the canes, but also using other biomass, special grasses, the river tamarind was mentioned, and some other cane grass and so on. So the idea was to have the sugar cane industry produce for us, using all the biomass it could get, produce for us electricity, base load electricity that could be bought by the light power company, and therefore save us use of foreign exchange for oil. That would have given the sugarcane industry a stable demand for power, for the power it supplied, and the rates would have been set at a level which could be constant, approved by the Fair Trading Commission and so on, and therefore that would have taken a lot of risk out of the sugarcane industry. And so the purpose of the restructuring was to make sure that the sugarcane industry was less risky than it used to be before, to make it more profitable, and to maintain our rum supplies as well as our sugar supplies. But beyond that, Madam President, we also know about the environmental value, the ecological value of having the sugarcane. In terms of the protection of our thin topsoils, we also know the value of the sugarcane as a word, the base crop that allows us to grow our food, because you normally grow your food in rotation with the sugarcane crop. And we know about the aesthetic value that it provides in the country once you have the sugarcane being grown. You don't get as much. You don't get all the bush, untended and unmanicured bush. You don't get as much coverage when the fields are properly tended, and you don't get trees and so on just growing up willy-nilly into power lines and that kind of thing. So, Madam President, this is why we have stuck with the sugarcane industry. That's why we have to restructure. We have to make sure that it gets restructured. It's costing us money. It costs us money to support the price that the farmers get when they sell the cane. And one of the things we were hoping for, that as we do this restructuring and we get more revenues in from sources which provide constant revenue, we will be able to reduce that subsidy. Not reduce the subsidy, we will be able to pay the farmers a better price, but not at the expense of government's own revenue. The revenue from the industry would have been sufficient to pay the farmers a better price. Madam President, we have to run the sugar factories, and we have to run some of the estates. And currently, I believe that the subsidy that we provide to the sugarcane industry it must be in the order of $60 or $70 million a year, just to keep the industry going. You know, it's getting up to close to 1% of the GDP of the country, because the government pays the debts that the Barbados Agricultural Management Company has. And we provide the funds for the rest of the industry. So, government is called upon in so many ways by so many sectors to give the support which enables them to keep going. And sometimes we think that when you talk about subsidy or you talk about support for government, that it relates only to social services, social welfare services, or support for the very poor, the very vulnerable. But a good chunk of government's revenue also goes in supporting the commercial sectors of the country, either in terms of putting infrastructure in place, or in terms of helping them to get over challenges that they face, and which we all keep hoping are temporary challenges, that we can get them fixed. I go into this little explanation, Madam President, on this resolution, which is a relatively simple resolution, just so that people have a little bit more appreciation for some of the intricacies of government's work and government financing. When government is asked to support and maintain these particular sectors, it always imposes on government an additional burden. And we always have then to make the judgment, is the long-term benefit from accepting this burden going to yield us more on what we undertake, the load we undertake. And then we have to balance, once we say undertake that load, we have to balance what that requires with what all the other services require. But if we do not accept these burdens, we get increased unemployment. If we not accept, both in agriculture and in the rum industry, we lose foreign exchange, both from the sugar, but particularly from the rum industry. And we avoid the chance to save foreign exchange by going into the biomass for the generation of electricity. And for these, and of course we lose a chance, as so many Caribbean countries have done, of maintaining the aesthetic value of the country. In our case, maintaining the quality and what little fertility our soils have got by having this sugarcane industry. And so this is another very clear indication that the government continues to give the support to the agricultural sector, to the, specifically in this case, to the sugarcane sector, sugarcane industry, and Madam President, this loan reflects continued confidence by Anson McKell and consolidated finance in the country, and in this particular, what we're doing in this sector, and it actually improves a little bit on the cost of the financing we had before. And so, Madam President, with those few words of explanation, I wish to move that this resolution on the External Loans Act, Sections 3 and 5, be passed. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Todd, you have the floor.
Madam President, I rise to, in my brief contribution, fully support the passage of this resolution and to take the opportunity to congratulate this Democratic Labour Party administration for steering the course with regard to the support for the sugar industry, Madam President. Whereas detractors would have suggested that sugar cane production in Barbados is doomed to failure and should be abandoned, as other neighboring islands in the region have pursued, I am very happy that this Democratic Labour Party administration has seen the wisdom of maintaining a viable sugar cane industry, Madam President. And I support what the move of this resolution Senator Boyce mentioned in terms of outlining the importance of the sugar cane industry to ensure that our economy is diversified and not surviving on one leg, as it were. We know tourism is our major foreign exchange earner, and we've developed in recent years the international business sector. But by having a diversified economy, including the agricultural sector, and sugar is prominent in this sector because sugar can earn valuable foreign exchange, or currency cannot be used to purchase imports from abroad. And so the earning of foreign exchange for our country is very, very important so that we can support our quality of life and standard of living, so that when we go to the supermarkets, we can see we have a variety of products from abroad, because much of our food is imported from abroad. And when we go to the department stores and clothing stores, we can purchase the latest state-of-the-art appliances, clothing, and so on that is available to countries around the world, because we pride ourselves in being a modern, developing country. In countries where there is a chronic shortage of foreign exchange, this is absent. You have supermarket shelves bare and the department store shelves bare because the country doesn't have enough foreign exchange to import the goods to stock those stores. So we've been able to spare the public of Barbados and visitors alike that experience in our small, open, developing economy in Barbados by having a diversified economy, so that if one particular foreign exchange earning sector is experiencing challenges at a particular time, this can be buttressed and augmented by other foreign exchange earning sectors in the economy. So that's the importance, Madam President, of having a diversified economy where we're not relying on too few sectors to earn foreign exchange for our country, Madam President. And so I was very surprised and disappointed to hear the opposition recently suggesting that, you know, the future of the sugar industry under this administration is in question. Because, Madam President, we have, since assuming office in 2008, moved steadfastly as an administration to support the diversification and the strengthening of the sugarcane industry. As Senator Boyce mentioned, we are looking at the construction of a multi-use sugar factory, which would, as in the past, just produce cane sugar to be exported in bulk at a lower price than if we to the EU or other foreign territories. Rather, you're looking at specialty sugars that can be, you know, have the Barbadian stamp in smaller quantities available in the supermarket shelves in Great Britain, Europe, and so on, fetching a higher price than the bulk sugar, Madam President. But that would require a modern state-of-the-art factory that can, you know, engage in some aspects of further refinement of the sugar and special packaging of the sugar to meet international standards that would make it feasible for our product to be marketable on the international market in terms of the specialty sugars sector, Madam President. And so I was disappointed to hear the opposition suggest that this, the construction of this multi-use sugar factory is in question, Madam President. We all know that the matter is sub judice in terms of the construction of that multi-use factory, but all the necessary support is being put in place, and I'm no lawyer, but I understand that with an injunction placed to sort of temporarily halt the further construction work on that site of the old Andrews Sugar Factory, that one option available to the government is to go to the court to ask the court's leave to have the injunction set aside so that construction work can continue, given the fact that a sugar factory was on that site previously, so there's no real change of use in terms of the proposal to construct a multi-use sugar factory at that location, Madam President. But as we await that determination in the courts of Barbados, the preparatory work proceeds at full pace, Madam President, because I was fortunate, Madam President, recently to attend the agricultural conference hosted by the Ministry of Agriculture, Food, Fisheries, and Water Resources. And at that conference, I was able to hear from experts in the field. We have a really well educated group of persons, both in the public sector and the private sector, in the agricultural industry. Many people with PhD degrees, with a wealth of experience. And what I learned in that conference, because I didn't just attend the opening ceremony, but I stayed for the better part of the first day of that conference, Madam President. And therefore, you know, while attending the various panel discussions and other aspects of the conference, we actually saw photographs of experimental planting of the river Tambring that Senator Boyce mentioned, to ensure that we are able to select the best varieties of the river Tambring in terms of yield per acre, to select those species that would be more suitable for harvesting by mechanical devices, Madam President. Those species of river Tambring that are better suited to our climatic conditions in terms of the level of precipitation, that is rainfall in our part of the world, as well as soil conditions and so on, Madam President. So that work is well on its way. We're now in a position then to identify those varieties of river Tambring that can be cultivated in mass across the island to provide the biomass, organic matter, to fuel the multi-use sugar factory in terms of providing the base load electricity to support, to feed into the grid. And as I understand it, that base load production of electricity is critical, because whereas we continue to develop the renewable energy sector in terms of solar, the generation of electricity by solar power and so on, this is considered intermittent. And as the word intermittent suggests, it can fluctuate from time to time, whereas the base load production of electricity by the normal bunker C fuel and natural gas or what have you, and by biomass, the combustion of biomass, such as what we're talking about here, river Tambring, that base load is more consistent and reliable, and is critical to providing reliable service in terms of electricity supply throughout our country, Madam President. So this multi-use sugar factory is critical to the development of alternative sources of energy, reducing the dependence on imported fossil fuels that have to be paid for in foreign exchange. Madam President. So this Democratic Labour Party administration is very serious about the diversification of our economy, and the sugar, a renewed sugar industry is critical in that mix, Madam President. So I just wish to take this opportunity to reassure the public that this Democratic Labour Party administration, as we move towards our third term in office with the will of the Almighty and the support of the public, that we, of course, we are, this is a work in progress, Madam President, and therefore we are very anxious as an administration to get the elections out of the way so that we can, with a renewed mandate, Madam President, and indeed an enhanced mandate, Madam President, I'm confident we'll be able to continue this tremendous track record that we have been able to pursue since assuming office in 2008, Madam President. And Madam President, as Senator Boyce mentioned, the whole issue of propelling the sugar industry forward is important to support the diversification of the agricultural sector, because I'm not agriculturist, but as I understand it, the rotation of crops and so on is such that with more acreage on the sugarcane production, you have a direct correlation in terms of, therefore, the increased production of root crops such as sweet potatoes and yams, because you see, Madam President, I'm fortunate to have attended that great institution in St. John, the Lodge School. I'm sure Senator, Professor Sir Henry Fraser would agree with me, having attended that school, Madam President, so that, coming up the school gap at Lodge School, on either side we would have had sugar cane being planted, and we know that while the young ratoons or fresh sugar cane plants are growing, in between those rows you would have the sweet potatoes and yams growing simultaneously, and then they're harvested as the sugar canes get taller, and so you have a symbiotic relationship there, Madam President. And what the experts say, as I understand it, Madam President, is that this arrangement is far superior in terms of greater yields per acre than just dedicating fields to root crop production alone, but the rotation with the sugar cane is symbiotic in that the biomass, again, the cane trash, then when it dries up, provides the necessary organic manure, as it were, the nitrate, to increase the nitrates in the soil to improve the quality and yields of the root crops, Madam President. And I'm very excited about this, Madam President, as we seek to increase the acreage of land under sugar production, Madam President, in this revitalized sugar sector, because then we can have, therefore, increase at the same time in the root crop production to increase the level of import substitution. When we see, for example, Madam President, that local entrepreneurs are now delving into this root crop production to such an extent that they're not just producing the primary product of the sweet potato tubules to be sold at the supermarkets, but are actually doing some level of processing in terms of the production of sweet potato chips that are well packaged, very tasty, and available as snacks in our various supermarkets as we speak, Madam President. Sweet potato chips, even breadfruit chips, Madam President, and plantain chips, Madam President, because we import currently these packaged plantain chips and so on from as far away as Costa Rica as we speak, using valuable foreign exchange. So the more of this, these products we can produce locally, the more foreign exchange we are earning, and eventually, as that industry is consolidated by the support of the local consumer, we then can look seriously at export to the region and further field earning foreign exchange for our country, Madam President. And this, the genesis of this comes from a renewed sugarcane industry, Madam President. And as I understand it, we've gotten the buy-in from the private sector. The government sugar lands are being heavily utilized, so that we are looking as in the short to medium term to actually increase yields of sugarcane as the necessary plant production techniques are, Madam President, improve in terms of, you know, the extent to which we provide the necessary fertilizer and crop production techniques to increase the yields per acre. So we're very excited, and as I understand it from the agricultural people, that we're expecting an increased level of sugar production in the very, very near future. And we look forward to the results of the sugarcane crop, which is, you know, for this year, which is imminent, Madam President. And let me just close that aspect by making the point that I am fortunate to have attended the annual Board of Governors meeting of the Inter-American Development Bank in Calgary, Alberta, a few years ago. And at one of the events surrounding that annual Board of Governors meeting was actually a panel discussion which brought together investors in the region, and we were presented with an audio-visual visual presentation, actual video footage of a similar multi-use sugar cane fledgling industry in the Latin American region, where they transform practically arid land, almost desert, by irrigation into massive sugarcane production, supported with a multi-use sugar factory generating electricity from the trash, the cane trash, the biomass, Madam President, and providing tremendous results and interest in investors. So this is, Madam President, a very feasible exercise, Madam President. And then in terms of the issue of the production of molasses, I was fortunate to serve as Minister of State within the Ministry of Industry, Madam President, in the past, and headed by the current Minister of Agriculture at the time. And I remember attending a number of the events relating to the rum industry. And what I learned is that a bottleneck was being created in terms of the shortage of molasses. And what was saving us was that we were able to import from Guyana, but the sources of molasses there was sort of inconsistent and unreliable, and we were able to rely on imports from the Dominican Republic. Fortunately for us, within the EU arrangement, the Dominican Republic was available in terms of, as Minister Boyce mentioned, the issue of rules of origin, so that we would not break the rules of origin. We were able to rely on imports from the Dominican Republic, but certainly the more local production of molasses, then the least likely we would have bottlenecks in terms of you know, suppressing the development of the rum industry, Madam President. And that is why this Democratic Labour Party administration makes no apologies for ensuring that the bulk storage tank at the Bridgetown port for molasses, when we realized there was a serious issue in terms of the breakdown of those old tanks neglected by the Barbados Labour Party, we moved full steam ahead to ensure that those you know, replacement tanks were constructed so that we would not have bottlenecks in terms of not being able to import sufficient quantities of molasses because we had nowhere to store them, Madam President. Because the rum industry is, again, a very important source of foreign exchange, Madam President. Let me remember, according to the historians, that rum, it is argued by the historians, was actually created in Barbados, just around this area in terms of the word rum bullion. During the early days, that term was coined in Barbados right here in Bridgetown, Madam President. So that authentic Barbadian rum is sought after around the world, and it has tremendous value in terms of earning foreign exchange. So this administration, through this diversified sugarcane industry, is providing necessary support to propel this industry forward, thereby earning more foreign exchange to our country, and then for our country. And then finally, in terms of the aesthetics, I remember visiting U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, several years ago as a student leader. And I was shocked, Madam President, that in this neighboring Caribbean territory, part of the United States of America, they had practically abandoned their agricultural sector. They had lots of hotels and fancy cars and huge supermarkets, but they were importing most of their food from Puerto Rico and Miami, and our agricultural sector, they said it was abandoned, and you had then in between the hotels and the roads, bush, and it was really not a sight to behold, Madam President. So when we fly into Barbados and we see the well-manicured sugarcane fields, keeping the aesthetics correct, Madam President, making Barbados attractive to tourists, and of course reducing the spread of vectors and other dangerous diseases that spread dangerous diseases such as leptospirosis and so on, Madam President. And of course for national security, where we don't have bush that then can harbor robbers and other criminals, Madam President. So this is all important in terms of the need to support the strength of the sugarcane industry. So without further ado, Madam President, I fully support the passage of this resolution.
Senator Adams, you have the floor.
Madam President, I believe I would say that I am duty-bound to support this resolution as a Barbadian from the old school, from the agricultural belt of the island. And although we have a kind of a love-hate relationship with sugar, we have to admit that on balance, it has been very good for Barbados, and we sometimes have to place on the back burner some of the more odious aspects of the industry. But I want to make the point, Madam President, that we have a comparative advantage in relation to the production of sugar. We are perhaps certainly one of the oldest, if not the very oldest country in the world, and certainly in this part of the world, in relation to sugar. And in our schools, when we are speaking about the sugar revolution, we try to make it clear that from around 1640, that Barbados had been involved in the production of sugar, and by the 1660s, we were the premier production of sugar virtually in the world, and became the gem of the British Empire in that regard. Now, over the years, we have done, sugar has done very well for us. As far as production is concerned, we moved up to over 100,000 tons of sugar in the 1930s, and the record shows that only 4 times since the 1930s had we dropped below 100 tons of sugar. Those years, from my notes, are 1935, when we produced 81,000 tons, 1940, 97,000 tons, 1948, 78,000 tons, and 1975, 96,000 tons. We went, Madam President, over the 200,000 mark at one point. And the foreign exchange that brought to this country has really helped tremendously in the economic development of Barbados. But not only did we benefit from the foreign exchange from the sale of sugar, one of the significant points that has been mentioned by Senator Boyce is the fact that non-sugar agriculture rotated around sugar. It was so then, and it is so now. In fact, the record also shows that whenever sugar production goes up, non-sugar production also goes up. And as a result of that, we have been able, over the years, to be virtually self-sufficient in a number of agricultural products, crops. We talk about our yams and our potatoes and our eddos and all those sorts of things. We were able to produce those crops as a result of rotating those crops around sugar. Our soils are not deep soils, a deep soil, and therefore one of the factors would be that when you grow the sugar canes to 3 or 4 crops, you were then exhausting the soil. And what we do as a result of that, from our experience, is to rotate the other agriculture producing crops around sugar. And so we have our Lisbon yams, we have our sweet potatoes, and the other aspects that we spoke about. But I want to make a point in relation to agriculture, and that is the role that the small farmer has played in agriculture. And whenever we are discussing it, I hope that we do not forget the significant part played by the small farmer. The small farmer, which we call the peasant farmer in Barbados, has actually been in the forefront of diversification in agriculture. It was indeed for their own livelihood. Sugar, of course, is all right, but you can't eat sugar unless you want to get diabetes and die at a young age. So what our peasant farmers did, our forefathers did, was they used their plots to plant several crops, many of them coming from Africa and so on. And in so doing, they were able to supplement their livelihood. They were able to actually get something to eat. And these were good crops. They were the type of carbohydrates that we are advised now that we ought to be eating. But we also had the pulses, which is the grains, the black eyes and the peas, the runcible peas and all those sorts of things. We had the cassava as well, which was used for a variety of reasons, and we understand that is also very healthy as well. So the small farmer has been in the forefront of agricultural diversification in Barbados, and as a result was able to help the black population in particular, but the island in general, to help to feed itself. Indeed, the history also shows that in the 1940s, when these were the war years, 1939 to 45, a gentleman by the name of Sir John Saint, he was given the task of looking at the agriculture to see what can be done, since the importation of food was not very possible with the war going on. And what he did, he suggested that at least 1/3 of our agricultural land ought to be reserved for the planting of food crops. And it was a result of that we were able to come through the war years reasonably well. And during those years, of course, the sugar production also increased. So we think that the small farmer ought to be remembered and extolled for the part that they played in the agricultural development and indeed the economic growth and development of Barbados. The sugar industry Madam President, also has given us a number of byproducts, some of which have been mentioned here, but there are others. But the two specifically mentioned, I think, was bagasse, and the other one mentioned was molasses. Molasses is particularly important because, again, we led the world into production of rum. And it is from the molasses that we are able to produce the rum. And the importance about molasses now in the present day is the fact that since we are not producing as much sugar, we therefore have a problem in accessing molasses, which we have to now import. And that importation of molasses is problematic. It's problematic from the standpoint that the European Union in particular are very concerned about the rules of origin in relation to imports into the Union. And therefore, the fact that we are importing the molasses has the possibility of bringing us into some conflict with the European Union in the sense that they use a term called provenance, which has to do with the origin and the beginnings of special ingredients that we have in things that are made. And when you do not and cannot prove the authenticity of the product, it means that you may have a barrier in getting that product into the European Union. And therefore, we believe that it is very important for us to capitalize the sugar industry, not only for its own sake, also from the standpoint of having our rum industry up to marks. And the rum industry is one of the major industries in Barbados right now. In fact, it is, I would say, it's the head of sugar itself. And wherever you go in the world, whether it be the Soviet Union or Paris or wherever, you are going to be able to get a Barbadian grog. And that brings me, Madam President, to the area of falernum. Falernum is also a byproduct of the sugar industry, but it is a very special byproduct in the sense that it is only produced in Barbados. And it is a secret that needs to be, spread abroad, and is a product that needs to be spread abroad, because the notion of mixing, we mix it here with rum, we call it rum and oil, corn and oil. But in other parts of the world, falernum is avidly sought after in relation of mixing of drinks. And the mixologists, when you see them on the television and so on, you always see that they're adding falernum into the mix. And therefore, Madam President, I think that's another good reason why we ought to be supportive of the sugar industry. There are several other aspects which we can also go into, and that is the fact that the sugar industry over the years gave Barbados a special ambiance, a special look, particularly when you were coming in an aircraft. What you would have seen, I don't think you'll see it now, would be well kind of manicured fields, well sorted out, rows and greenery, and looking as a very civilized place. And that obviously, as far as we know, is one of the attractions and was one of the attractions of the island. And it also, because it lent to the fact that you were able to control the environment of the island. We were seen to be good stewards of our environment. And persons coming to the island would always comment on the fact of the greenery of Barbados and the way in which it was kept. We had the carrot roads, we had the main roads, we had the fields, and we had at the end of the fields, we had the hedgerows where we had the various grasses, particularly the cashcas grass. And in our farming, we would always have the peas at the corn rows, and of course at the borders. And at Christmas time, we had the sorrel. And that made Barbados a very special place. And hence, we believe that over the years, with the reduction, for various reasons, of the planting of sugar, quite a lot of our land, that was only one reason, went into not being used. And as a result, we are having quite a lot of bush in the island. And we are getting complaints about courage, we are getting complaints about rodents, we are getting complaints about the place being unkempt. So what we want to do, and what we can do, is to set targets to bring our fallow land back into sugar production, and particularly sugar production. It is my view that we can set 5 to 10 year targets. And because we know of sugar production, and because we know of the manner of crop rotation around it, within 5 to 10 years, I am sure that we can get up to 50, 60, maybe even 100 tons of sugar. And as a result of that, we would be doing a very good economic service to this country. One, we would be bringing foreign exchange to the country, and as a result of that, the economic development of the country would also go up. But we would also be bringing young people back into a very wholesome activity, which is agriculture. Not in the same way as the plantation agriculture, but I believe that we could look at a new land policy, land holding policy, and we could have young people grouping together in cooperatives, 10 at a time and so on, operating small, relatively small, manageable plots of land. And this, Madam President, would be able to involve our young people, particularly in the countryside. We could even bring some from Roundbridge Town and have them involved in agriculture. And as a result, they would be able to earn a living, the unemployment would come down, and a lot of the social problems in Barbados would also be lessened. And therefore, there is a tremendously good reason why we ought to look very closely of supporting this resolution, and even beyond that, making sure that agriculture is brought back into the center of economic development of this country. We know that we have the tourism and other industries as well, but the fact is that agriculture should be linked into an industry like tourism, in fact, various other industries. But certainly in relation to the tourism industry, we should be able to have that virtually direct linkage between agriculture and tourism. And what that would do, in fact, is to help us to retain a lot of our foreign exchange that are presently being leaked out of the island. In the sense that so long as we have a good, viable sugarcane industry, we will be producing the food crops, and we should have a situation where the hotel industry would be actually taking considerable quantities of their food crops from our local farmers. We have a situation too, I just want to mention that because I think I mentioned it before sometime, that tourism is an export industry, and at least we should see it as an export industry. in the sense that, let us take, for example, the cruise ships. We must be in the area of 700,000 or so cruise ship passengers getting off the ships here in Barbados. Now, the point that I'm trying to make here is that we would not necessarily have to export a lot of our agricultural products. We can, in fact, make arrangements with the cruise ships to supply them with a lot, from eggs to poultry to pork, whatever. And also, we probably are already doing that. I'm glad to hear the minister mentioning that. And we can also make sure that in our restaurants and in our hotels that we are actually serving local foods, because it is my understanding and the understanding of most people in the industry that the majority of tourists coming to Barbados really want to taste Barbadian food. Some of them are called foodies, I think. They just come to sample the varieties of foods that we serve. And we cannot do that unless we are actually producing those things. We don't want to be importing the food stuff and then to give them. We want to say, well, this is a genuine Barbadian potato, this is genuine Barbadian yam, this is Barbadian okra from which you are having your cuckoo, and so on. So therefore, Madam President, the resolution has far-reaching consequences, not only for the sugar industry, which we ought to support and capitalize, but also for the broader economic development of Barbados. We can see it in the linkages, we can see it in the crop rotation and the development of other crops, we can see it in relation to the tourism which I just mentioned, and generally speaking, our rum industry, the production of molasses, the production of falernum, all these things and more are directly and indirectly linked to our sugar industry. And the agriculture as a whole, sugar in particular and agriculture as a whole, is extremely important to the development of this country. And therefore, the same way that we are promoting renewable energy as being very important, and I support that, almost simultaneously, we should be supporting agriculture. For Madam President, if we were to just consider that we are importing some $700 or so million of foodstuffs into this country, and a very huge import fuel bill, if we were to be able, within a specified time, to even have those, the foreign exchange savings would be extremely considerable. And the savings of that foreign exchange and other monies could then be invested into other parts of the economy and more diversify our economy. And it is for those reasons, Madam President, that I want to say that I wholeheartedly support this resolution.
Senator Fraser, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to support this resolution. After all, it's absolutely essential. But I am tempted to say that as regards the sugar industry, it is in a sense a little bit too little too late. We've heard from others the historical facts of the productivity of the sugar industry in the past, the very large tonnage that was produced from this very tiny country. We have understood from, again, the amateur historians, the methods of crop rotation, which provided Barbados with sustenance throughout the Second World War in particular, when we stored our food and we could import very little because ships were being torpedoed and so on. We were forced not to import very much and to have literally sustainable food production in Barbados. So we've had some of that history. Madam President, I had not expected to speak on this subject because, of course, there was nothing like this on the order paper, and I checked for order papers up until 9:30 this morning before I left home. So I've not got any facts at my fingertips that I should have. I congratulate Senator Adams, who, like a very honorable, excellent role model of a principal, always does his homework and is well prepared. So he was very able to draw out of his large, well-filled bag all of the notes of a previous discussion on agriculture. But I rise, Madam President, because I think there are a few facts that would be useful for us to know. First of all, we were able to produce an almost instant sugar industry within 7 years of sugar coming into Barbados in 1640, simply because the sugar industry in Brazil was very, very productive. And as I'm sure many people know, it was the Jewish community in Brazil who were so controlling and making a great deal of money out of the sugar industry there, especially in the area around Recife, that they were expelled by the Portuguese powers that be because they were just simply getting too wealthy. But they had developed the technology. They had been actually making alcoholic beverage from the sugar, but they didn't call it rum. And so when sugar came into Barbados in 1640, very much as a result of the movement of the sugar from Brazil, and then with the movement of the technical skills of the Jewish industrialists, they brought what Richard Ligon, the historian, called in his book the ingenuo, the sugar factory, the boiling house, and the Dutch windmill model into Barbados. We began with cattle mills, which were more familiar to medieval types, and the cattle mill was used in Cyprus, because remember, Madam President, sugar moved from the Far East, from areas of Singapore and Indonesia, across into the Arab world in the 9th century, and had reached Cyprus, which had a thriving sugar industry by the 13th and 14th century. The Portuguese brought it to Brazil in the 15th and 16th century, and we, of course, adopted it from them as a result of the Jewish experience in Brazil. So I think that's an important point to know. Alcohol was made before, but they didn't call it rum. In those days, commercial exchanges were made in barrels and bags of whether it was sugar or something else, and hence the name rum bullion. And so we can claim not that we're the oldest producers of sugar or of rum in the world or in this hemisphere, but we are the originators of the name rum bullion, which gave rise to the simplified name rum. So the phrase that we like to use is Barbados, the rum come from, is absolutely accurate. Having said that, Madam President, I think some of the facts that people do need to know is that the decline in the sugar industry is very much a pejorative, emotional issue. And a lot of it goes back to when I was a child, back in the early 1960s, and the famous Cane Blades speech of our national hero, Mr. Barrow, who said famously that he hoped not to see cane blades in Barbados in the future. And really and truly, Madam President, agriculture has never been regarded as a top ministry in Barbados. The important ministry, of course, has been the Ministry of Finance, and people who are regarded as privileged and have a valuable role to play have the biggest budget ministries, the ministries of tourism, of education, of foreign affairs, and agriculture is relegated often to the very smallest budget in the entire expenditure of the Barbadian estimates. Agriculture has not been promoted extensively, except in recent times by some significant people, and here, although I haven't got his permission, I'm sure Mr. James Paul would be happy for me to call his name in terms of the work, the advocacy, the education that he has contributed. I congratulate him and commend him. People like Mr. Patrick Bethel, who has brought modern agricultural methods, but not been able to bring modern industrial methods to the sugar industry. Because another fact that individuals should know, Madam President, is that when the great sugar windfall came about in the early 1970s, I was still in Britain doing my PhD, and in that era, that sugar windfall, when we were still getting preferential sugar prices from Britain, that instead of going into the redevelopment of the sugar industry in Barbados with a modern state-of-the-art factory, it went into the Consolidated Fund. and I'm sure that did a lot of good for the establishment of the university, for the strengthening of our education, for building of some of our new roads, and so on, but it did not strengthen the sugar industry. And that is why a few years later we were forced to import to Barbados not a state-of-the-art sugar industry, but a second-hand sugar factory from Antigua, which no longer wanted it. And those of you who have visited the Eastern Caribbean islands, going up the islands is rather like going on a trek through history, because you go up the islands and you see the first island in which sugar was abandoned, and that was way, way back, and that was Tortola in the British Virgin Islands, which went right back to forest. And following Tortola was, I think, Nevis. Nevis sugar industry was resuscitated by Sir Graham Briggs, and they sang folk songs about Sir Graham Briggs in Nevis, because he took a couple of Barbadian sugar industry experts across, resuscitated the sugar factories, and they sang songs about him because they brought wealth back to Nevis. And then followed Montserrat. It was abolished there after the First World War. St. Kitts is the last to abolish the sugar industry in our area, and St. Kitts, within 12 years, St. Kitts has reverted completely to forest. Now, because of their rainfall, it does look all like primordial virgin forest. We will soon look like that, but because our rainfall is the ideal rainfall for growing sugar, and I make that point because our average rainfall is just under 50 inches most years, just over 50 some years, and only rarely reaches 60 inches per year. And that level of rainfall is just right for sugar. Too much rainfall increases disease, makes the canes rot before they can be reaped, and so on. It's almost as bad as having the cane fires. So, Madam President, one of the interesting things about Barbados is because of its shallow soil, because of its temperature, and because of its modest rainfall, it's a perfect environment for growing sugar as well as the usual root crops. But we have reached a stage, because of the lack of investment in sugar in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we have reached a stage where Barbados is now more forested than it has been since the settlement in 1627. This is a well-established fact. The discussions around the physical development plan, consultations that took place all through last year, have demonstrated this. Large areas of Barbados that are now reforested. And I don't just mean with the River Tamarind, which overtakes everything else and replaces a great deal, nor do I refer to the Cow Inch in the sad parish of St. John. I have to say, Madam President, that when Senator Todd refers to early days in St. John, and he talks about the beauty of the sugarcane fields, he's harking back 50 years, and I didn't realize he was so old, because it's a very long time since Barbados has looked as neat as that.
On the point of order, the honourable member is misleading the chamber. I was born late December back in '63, 54 years ago.
Thank you, Madam President. The point I really am making is that when I was a small boy in St. John, there were 6 operating sugar factories. And that was a bit more than 54 years ago, admittedly. But those factories progressively closed until there was none in St. John when the last one, Uplands, closed its doors. But, Madam President, the point is the sugar industry has been grossly neglected for 50 years. And agriculture is still neglected, and it is still, pardon me, Madam President, but it is still referred to as the Poor Relations Ministry. Now, contrast our handling of our sugar export with that of Mauritius. Now, Mauritius is approximately 2.5 times the size of Barbados. It has much more rainfall, but the sugar is grown in the lowlands. And their production of sugar was not as great as ours 100 years ago. And Mauritius has cornered the British market. Now, my grandchildren and my son and so on, my family, they live in Britain, and so I'm in Britain once or twice a year, and I always haunt the supermarkets to look at British supermarket prices. Some of them are very high, some of them are very low, but one of my interests, of course, is sugar. And in Britain, the number of different brands of sugar is quite considerable. There may be 20, 25 different looking packages on the supermarket. But while about 1/3 of them, at my last count, simply said source Asia, the majority, 2/3 to 3/4, actually indicate that the sugar comes from Mauritius. Mauritius has cornered the British sugar market, and it sells the sugar in half a kilogram, 1 kilogram, and 2 kilogram packages. Reference was made to this kind of selling of sugar by Senator Todd. But the interesting thing is that when our Deepwater Harbor was opened back in '61, the bulk sugar storage was the approach because we had preferential prices. So the sugar was taken in bulk from the sugar factories. It was unloaded in bulk to form a mountain of sugar in that giant warehouse, and it was moved by conveyor belt into the holds of the ships that came and took it to Britain at what can only be called a give-away price. Because some years ago I did this calculation on first joining the Senate and discussing the estimates related to agriculture some 6 years ago, and I looked at the cost of the sugar price that we were getting per ton in those days, and I compared it with the cost of the sugar price we would be likely to be getting it if we were packaging it in small consumable packages. And it was something like a 30-fold difference in price per kilogram. So we have been giving that away. And Madam President, Dr. Colin Hudson, the man who played a big role in the invention of the sugar harvesting machine, and I haven't yet discovered good data on river tamarind harvesting machines, but Dr. Colin Hudson, who was an inventor as well as an agronomist, on the National Trust hikes on Sunday mornings that I went to with him in the late 1970s, had been writing, speaking, advocating, evangelizing, and begging the Barbados government to renegotiate their sugar deal and to sell our sugar in those packages. And I am now talking more than 40 years ago. We have continued as a result of what a number of other people have begun to call the implementation deficit disorder, to give away our sugar instead of marketing effectively. And even when the packaging equipment was installed at Portville factory, almost a couple of decades ago, it was not actually utilized to do this job. And I know that in Mauritius, the wages, which I've checked out, the wages of workers in Mauritius is nothing like the wages in Barbados. So it probably means that we cannot possibly compete with Mauritius at the level of the cost of selling it. If we continue to propagate the view that Barbados sugar is the best in the world, then marketing is everything, as I'm sure many around this table are aware that how you market makes a huge difference. So, Madam President, I make those points about the facts of the sugar industry neglect. I do hope it can be resuscitated, and my friend Senator Adams has made the point that with the will, with the vision, the plans and the programs, we could resuscitate our sugar industry, and we could certainly expand our rum industry. And so I want to finish on the point about rum, Madam President. We've been making our rum from molasses. We've been having to import a lot of molasses. I don't know much about the quality of the molasses that we import, but I do know that in the era when we didn't have the sugar that we produce in our supermarkets, and we were having to import sugar from Central American countries, which shall be nameless. I don't want to be criticized for naming them. It was very apparent to everyone who bought that sugar that it was extremely variable in its color, its constituency, and its content. The 3 C's of bad sugar. Completely different to our sugar. It had a variety of different shades ranging from a kind of yellow to a kind of brown, and odd things would appear in that sugar. So, Madam President, we do produce good sugar, and we do produce good molasses, but there's another component. And I want to mention the St. Nicholas Abbey rum, because those of us who are interested in taste, the St. Nicholas Abbey rum is made in a very holistic way, in that the sugar is grown on the plantation. The syrup factory is in fact a factory removed from Fairfield Plantation in St. Michael, just north of the city center, and it was removed at the cost of the National Trust and given to St. Nicholas Abbey at the time that Colonel Cave was attempting to keep that plantation productive in sugar. The present owner of St. Nicholas Abbey, who has not given me permission to call his name, has developed a holistic and comprehensive green enterprise at St. Nicholas Abbey. The sugar is grown, the syrup is made in the syrup factory, and the new refinery there produces rum with syrup as its base, as opposed to molasses at its base, And it is as different as a standard malt whiskey and a peat whiskey. It is as different as the different types of wine from the current common molasses-based rum. It's as different as an amber rum, one of the better Barbadian amber rums, from white rum in its flavor as standard molasses rum. And I think that if Senator Adams' views of the expansion of sugar, if the forests can be cleared, and remember, Madam President, that when the forests were cleared in the 1620s and 30s, they were cleared by men working with axes, and the fields were dug in hoes. And those of you who've ever had to take down a Barbados tree, the so-called fig tree, Barbados citrifolia, Ficus citrifolia, the bearded fig tree, will know that it's a tree with a very hard wood filled with resin. It's exceedingly difficult to cut, certainly with an axe. And the farmers, those peasant farmers, for the first 10, 15 years in Barbados, poor old northern people, many of them servants, captured on the docks of London, chopping down and creating fields which eventually produce sugarcane, and we can't do anything about our forests today. So if Senator Adams' will and vision and plan is put into effect and we actually produce more sugar, I can conceptualize that there will be not only smaller units, which are currently being researched, and I don't hear mentioned much of, but smaller units of king grass production. And there may be many such king grass factories around the island because they can operate on a small scale and be cost effective. But I anticipate that there may well be more syrup factories and an expansion of the best rum in the world made from syrup and not from molasses. And let me close, Madam President, by simply reminding colleagues that the falernum, of which Senator Adams spoke, while used in an equal mixture with rum as the drink Corning oil as an appetizer, it is a far tastier drink if the mixologists mix the equal volumes of rum and falernum with a dash or two of Angostura bitters and shake it up with chipped ice in your shaker, and then you produce a magnificent cocktail which should, in fact, go viral. And if it did, not just a simple Corning oil, the name of which people don't understand. Some people think it means because you get drunk, and the phrase you get corned might be correct. That may be the source of the name, but the cocktail could go viral, and that would give Barbados name and Barbados rum a new lease on life for the very precious Barbados brand. So, Madam President, the story is not closed on the sugar industry, but it is terribly important for us to overcome the implementation deficit disorder, look at the industry in detail, correct the mistakes of the past, of which there have been many, and go forward to make Barbados and Barbados rum again, once again, a global name. Thank you.
Senator Watson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Just in case we have forgotten that we are actually debating a resolution to borrow some money. I would like to refer to the actual loan that we are supposed to be debating this morning. Madam President, I understand the difficulty in which Barbados finds itself now, or should I say in which we find ourselves now. Negotiating from a position of disadvantage is always a very difficult thing to do. And I have to commend whoever negotiates on behalf of the government, because negotiating from our position now is not an easy task. And as I referred to it some time ago, it's like playing dominoes when you have 5 doubles. And you're not sure how the game will go. But
one of the things at a time like that you have to do is to have some faith and also have some confidence in what you're capable to do with 5 doubles. And sometimes you win. Sometimes you come close to winning. And sometimes you lose. And Madam President, one of the things about the trust and confidence is that you never show that you have a bad hand. You always look confident, so that your opponents are always very concerned about how you're going to play your hand. And Madam President, I say that because Barbados has a lot to offer. Barbados has a lot that we should be confident in, so that we should not be concerned about, well, let me rephrase that. We should not be entirely concerned about the position in which we have found ourselves, because we have one of the most beautiful countries in the world. We have a citizenry that are educated, that have come through a period of development that has given us tenacity and I want to call it behavior, demeanor that is one that will take us out of any well, any ditch we find ourselves. So I have no doubt, Madam President, that we don't have to be afraid or concerned about when we are negotiating. And I say that because when I look at the loan, you can see we are negotiating the loan at almost 8% interest, which were it 15 years ago would not have been at that level. The other thing that struck me about this also is the complete control, and I'm glad I'm speaking before Senator Ince, because I'm sure I'll get some financial lessons when he speaks. But there's, and I may be wrong, but I see on 2 occasions in the conditions where it is the sole opinion of the arranger. In other words, it's not negotiated. The opinion of the arranger is final. And I somehow, when in negotiating, I don't like terms like that. But then again, I am not a financial expert. The other thing that I became concerned about, if you're looking for it, it is really immediately after the condition number 11, I believe, at the end of the page 4. The other thing that I am concerned about, Madam President, is, sorry, that's the one I'm coming to now on page 4. The one before that was number 1 at the bottom of page 3. On the bottom of page 4, Madam President, it states that the loan could be, the interest on the loan could be increased by 0.25% per annum if there's any deterioration in the government, in the credit ratings of the Barbados government. I think we had the experience of that with loans before. And Madam President, it hit me, if you're going to tell me that you're going to increase the interest rates if our credit rating goes down, but you don't tell me that you're going to reduce the interest rates if our credit rating goes up. And that's something that I'm not sure, because I checked the wording, and the wording said deterioration. It did not say change. It did not say change in interest. It said deterioration. So I would think, Madam President, that if the credit rating goes down and the interest rate goes up, I would like to see, if the credit rating goes up, that the interest rate goes down. Just my thought. Well, Madam President, the last thing in terms of the loan that I want to make a comment on is there's a fee for arrangement, the arrangement fee, which I assume is being paid to consolidated finance. Madam President, in our government, in our institutions, we have some of the finest trained people in the Caribbean. I believe within the Ministry of Finance, within the Central Bank, and within the other financial units in Barbados, that we have some of the best that you can find. We even have ministers of state in the Prime Minister's office. And as a result of that, Madam President, I believe that we are capable of negotiating or arranging those things that are for Barbados by Barbadian people and by the government itself. So, Madam President, as a result of this, I want to suggest, if it does not exist already, I want to suggest that within the, I don't know if you could, it wouldn't be, it probably could be a separate unit, but we should have a small unit of those financial wizards who will sit down and who can arrange these things. When I calculated, and I hope I calculated correctly, but it is costing us about $168,000 for just arranging that. Madam President, I suppose that's the cost of financing, but if you can save it, then save it, okay? So, Madam President, that would be my suggestion. If that unit doesn't exist, I would like to see such a unit existing, because in the position that we are in now, we don't only have to negotiate loans, but we have to search all over the world for the best possible funds. I think that we've done well by becoming a member of the Latin American Bank, and that is one step. I believe that if we have a unit that is searching continuously, that we will be able to find the sorts of funds that Barbados need. And one last thing on this, before I move on to the subject matter of the morning. I believe, Madam President, that there has to be some way that we could trade in currencies other than US dollars. I believe that if we're doing business with Trinidad, we should either be trading in Barbados dollars or Trinidad dollars. I believe that if we're trading with Antigua, we should trade in Barbados dollars or Eastern Caribbean dollars. But this idea of always trading in US dollars seems to be putting not only a lot of pressure, but I think there's a lot of creativity being encouraged by having to find US dollars. And that may not always be the best thing. But the financial experts will be able to deal with that. I think that's something that we should, at this time, begin to look at. I know that Senator Boyce would refer me to the CMCF, right? And that was, you know, I said it to her before, a bad driver of a Rolls Royce doesn't make the Rolls Royce bad. It just makes the driver bad. So if we had a system that is good, and it didn't work, it simply means that we have the wrong people managing it, that's all. And we need to make the system work well. Madam President, that's my bit on the on the loan, because I wanted to make sure that we are on the subject this morning. And I go now to the other subject, which is agriculture. Madam President, the loan is to refinance the sugar industry. And the little bit of teaching that I had tells me that there's nothing wrong with borrowing for operating expenses, but it has to be short-term and rolling over all the time. And I guess in the context of this, we might call this short-term and rolling over as well. But in spite of that, I believe that so much talk has been made about the sugar industry here that I don't want to go too deep into it. But the fact is that I think we have been fooling around with the sugar industry. And I think, Madam President, it's time now that we begin to get serious about the sugar industry. There's absolutely no doubt that Barbados' sugar is the best sugar in the world. And I don't see why you should have the best product in the world and suffering. That don't make any sense, right? So what the best product in the world requires, as my colleague Senator Irene Sandiford-Garner will say, it requires marketing. And maybe we need to put that senator in the sugar industry so that the success of the sugar industry might follow that of the success of the tourism industry. But the fact of the matter is, Madam President, is that sugar, and when I say sugar, I don't mean the sugar that we get now. I mean the real Barbados brown sugar, which I have mentioned in this Senate umpteen times. That is what we have to produce. I hear this thing about special sugars, but if you're referring to the Barbados brown sugar as a special sugar, then I agree. If you're not referring to that as a special sugar, I don't agree. This idea of little sachets to be put into tea and it is, fine, refined sugar, I am not agreeing with it. Madam President, my sister lives in England, and she told me, and I was shocked when she told me, that people actually, when they go to a restaurant, ask for Barbados sugar. A teaspoon of Barbados sugar in a cup of tea is the greatest thing in the world. But we have to market it. We have to market it, Madam President. And I've mentioned it here before. The little packages of brown sugar being sold in Barbados in souvenir packages. Some in crocus bags and some in little drawstring bags. And a half pound being sold for $9. I believe it's more expensive now, right? So I believe that the sugar industry, and I take the point, Madam President, that sometimes the private sector is better at these things than the government. And I heard a senior executive of a leading company in Barbados recently mention his willingness to assist with the sugar industry in Barbados. And I believe, Madam President, that maybe the government needs to look at a joint venture between the rum producers and the sugar industry and see where we can get the best out of the sugar cane that we grow, the best out of the name Barbados brown sugar, the best out of what is known in the world as the best sugar in the world, but we're not capitalizing on it. And I believe, Madam President, with an international brand, a joint venture with such a brand, and some of the other brands, the other rum producers, that we could put Barbados back on top with sugar. And then our fields, of which Senator Fraser is concerned, turning into jungle or forest, would no longer be. We would return to the lovely manicure gardens of which Senator Adams spoke about just now. We would replant Barbados entirely with sugarcane, because we will not only be producing the Barbados brown sugar, but we will then be producing molasses, not only for rum, because molasses is bottled and marketed, and we have an advantage, Madam President, and we have two medical people here, they could correct me. I understand that the Barbados unsulfured molasses is again the best in the world. But do we know that, or do we do anything about it, or do we market it? Right? So, Madam President, I could see a sugar industry within the next few years overtaking the tourist industry. You don't see it, I see it, because the amount of saving and the amount of foreign exchange earning that can be done through sugarcane is unbelievable. Just take some time to think it out and work it out, and it can be done. Molasses, a bottle of molasses being sold, being wholesale for $4 or $5 from Barbados. Pounds of brown sugar being sold on the health market can be done, so that we can really have an industry that is diversified. And I have a feeling, Madam President, that with the relationship with ANSA Merchant Bank, which seemed to be quite a good quite good relationship, and with our membership of CAF, I could see a lot of development coming to the sugar industry. Madam President, I just want to make a little plea. We, in this Senate, some time ago, paid tribute to Sir Clifford Husbands. And at that time, we all recognize his love for agriculture and his involvement in getting things done. The idea of bringing children to Government House and getting them involved in agriculture was recognized as one of the good things that he had done during his sojourn as Governor General. Madam President, I really want to suggest that something be done to continue his memory in the agricultural sector. I'm not sure what it will be, but I believe that if we are following the thinking that I am thinking, and that we have a real good production of Barbados brown sugar and Barbados molasses, and I stress the word Barbados molasses and Barbados brown sugar, not just molasses or just sugar, that we may need a second factory. And that second factory could probably bear his name to produce those special items of brown sugar and molasses. Madam President, I want to thank you for the time given to me. I want to support the resolution. I believe that any resolution, any amendment, any bill that comes to this Senate, well, for the little time left, that I would support anything that has to do with agriculture. We need to eat what we grow and grow what we eat. I'm obliged.
Madam President, I beg to move that this Sitting be suspended until 2:45 for lunch.
Question is that the sitting be suspended until 2:45 p.m. Honorable Senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Accordingly, the sitting is now suspended until 2:45 p.m.